Welcome to The Classical Mind, a podcast about the great books in the Western canon. We're your hosts. I'm Father Wesley Walker.
I'm Dr. Junius Johnson.
And we are here kind of on the verge of the end of a season and the beginning of a new season of the show. This is the end of season 3 and the beginning of season 4. It's hard to believe that we've been at it this long. And so we wanted to do a kind of special episode today, a bonus episode. And we have two objectives in this. The first is to unveil the reading list for the next season of the show. And then the second is to kind of talk a little bit about a life of reading and why that is such a foundational thing for the both of us, I think. And the occasion for all this is that we have recently crossed the line of 2,000 subscribers on our Substack, and so we wanted to make sure that we said a big thank you to all of you who support the show financially or otherwise. Everyone who listens, everyone who engages in the various discussions that we have on Substack and in the subscriber chat and on the comments of episodes and in the newsletters and people who reach out to us privately by email and all that. We're just so thankful for you all and the fact that we get to have these conversations with you. It's awesome.
Yeah, it really is great. And it's really cool to hit that landmark. And so we knew we wanted to do something for it. And we thought, well, what would be better than to, in some ways, while we have to look forward and unveil what's coming next, also have a bit of a retrospective on just, who Father Wesley and I have been as we've come to this point, and how this thing that we're talking about with you every month, these different books, and this just the life of reading books that comes out of, how that's been an indispensable part of how we've managed life in this world and whatnot. Season 4 is going to unfold a little bit differently than previous seasons. We are not going to do a draft, and so this is not going to be the draft format, but rather we're going to be unveiling to you something fully formed. And the reason for that is very, very exciting, which you were probably aware of if you've been following us in various formats, which is that Father Walker is about to embark on the journey of becoming Dr. Father Wesley. And
Father Doctor, the ecclesial title goes first.
That's right, because Dr. Father is the guy who directed your dissertation. It sounds funnier, though. So Dr. Father, Doctor, future Dr. Father Wesley is starting his PhD program at the Catholic University of America. And one of the things that a conversation he and I had when I was in DC recently for the Redefining the Classics conference was, how do we continue this program together in a way that respects the increased demands on his time? Because he is continuing to function as a parish priest and now also doing doctoral studies. And that's a lot of stuff to do. So we entered into an exploratory conversation where there were no expectations on anybody. And I said, I really think that if we curate the reading list such that it is either going along with things that you're studying or playing to strengths that are already there in your intellectual makeup, I think we can still do this and keep it feasible. And we began to sort of kick around. We're sitting in his living room and throwing ideas like, well, what might that look like? And we started throwing these things out there. And before we knew it, we had a pretty full season that we were both really, really excited about. And that's how season 4 came about.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun. That's the first time we've ever actually planned a season out, because in the past, all we've done is drafted. And we really, for the purpose of the draft, I think didn't want to exchange ideas too much. But this was kind of more fun to brainstorm and talk through exactly what we would do. And so I guess what we could do at this point is maybe just unveil the different reading selections that we have. And I guess if you want, you and I can alternate. Do you want to go first with the October? Because we have one more episode or two more episodes in season 3. There's Frankenstein, which comes out in August, and then we're doing Taming of the Shrew in September. So the new season starts in October. And so what will we be reading first?
So first we're going to read Anselm's Proslogion. We're really excited about this because it's obviously one of the most famous arguments in the history of philosophy. People have very strong opinions about it in different ways, and it's often trotted out even in secular philosophy courses as an example of how some people have tried to argue for the existence of God in the past. Anselm's doing something much more interesting than trying to prove that God exists in the Proslogion, and that's what really drew Father Wesley and I wanted to talk about it, is that we wanted to read it more closely than that, and to say, we'll talk about it as an argument for the existence of God, of course, but also to talk about it in the context of Anselm's larger intellectual project, and maybe shed some light on the what that what that is and what that has to offer to us besides a simple philosophical exercise.
Yes, yes, I'm very excited. Saint Anselm's one of my favorite of the medieval thinkers, and so that's going to be a ton of fun to have that conversation. Once we finish that in October, we're going to go to a novel, a kind of short novel, in November, Billy Budd Sailor by Herman Melville. This is a book that I had read. I've read probably 4 or 5 times in my life, and started it when I was in high school and have just kind of gone back to it every so often. It's a really interesting book, kind of tragic book, but it's really causes us to think a lot, I think, and so it'll be a good, I think, conversation for us to have about that. Is that one you've read?
I've not read that one, and I love Melville, especially Moby Dick, obviously, and I'm actually looking forward to reading Moby Dick again as soon as I can get clear to it. So I'm really excited to get into that one as well. Once
Excellent.
November's done, in December, we're going to do something a little fun. And it's a bit of a gift to you too, as well, listeners, because there won't be any assigned reading for December. We're going to have a conversation about medieval exegesis. And so we're going to explain how they approached reading text, and we're going to talk about the culture of that and some of the nuances of that. There are some books out there that we could say, check and take a look at these. They're secondary sources. There are some medieval things we could point to, but it didn't feel like there was something that was really obviously this gets you into the whole culture of it. So we're not going to try to force a reading onto it, but we're going to be talking through. Father Wesley's studying this semester, and it's one of my passions as a medievalist as well. And so we'll be talking through just what did the culture of reading look like. And it's kind of cool because in a sense, it's, if they had been doing a classical mind podcast in the Middle Ages, how would they have done it?
Hmm. Yeah, that's going to be a ton of fun to have that conversation. That'll be one of the most interesting episodes too, I think, just because of the lack of a actual text.
Yeah.
That will be interesting.
Anything can
Um,
happen. Right?
anything can happen. That's right. That's right. We're going to keep everybody on their toes, you know. To start the new year, 2026, January, we're going to do Lilith by George MacDonald, which is not a book that I have read at all. But my wife has read, I think, twice and loves it and keeps telling me to read it. And so I figured this was a good way to kind of meet her demands in that area. And also, I love George MacDonald, and so I really need to read that one. Very excited to do that because he was so brilliant and such a good writer.
Yeah, I've not read it since I think college, and it was pretty cool as we were sitting in Father Wesley's living room, and we brought this up, and his wife kind of stuck her head in out of the kitchen and was like, "Yes."
Finally,
Yeah.
she's been trying to tell me to read it for years, and then Junius comes over, and all of a sudden it's done.
No, I'm gonna take the next grouping and let you take the grouping that comes later on.
Sure.
And so for February, March, and April, we will be reading the most famous trilogy in the history of the world, by which I mean, of course, Dante's Divine Comedy. What will be fun about this, and one of the reasons I wanted to introduce this group to you, is that I'm bringing in three of my friends who are Dante scholars to talk with us about this. So in February, my friend Catherine Illingworth, who was a student of mine when I was teaching at Yale, and has been worked for a great deal, did a lot of great work towards a doctorate in Dante at UCLA before personal issues required her to step out of that. She'll be coming on to join us, and she is just a wonderfully sensitive reader and a really delightful personality. So she's going to help us think through Inferno. And then Carol Kyoto, who was also a student of mine at Yale when she was doing her PhD in Italian, she studied Latin with me, and she's now made a very good career for herself in digital humanities, working with preserving the old text and converting text for digital access and that sort of a thing. Worked at Harvard for a long time on that and runs an international seminar on that in Europe every summer, which she's just back from. She's agreed to come and talk with us about Purgatorio. And then I'm hoping that my good friend and former graduate school roommate, Jonathan Jolts, who's a professor of literature at Redeemer University in Canada, will come and talk with us about Paradiso. I'm just waiting for the confirmation from him, but he is just full of energy and passion. And he and I the first course he and I took together when we were both divinity students was a Dante course with Peter Hawkins, who is one of the great readers of Dante of our generation. So that's going to be our February, March, and April reading. We spread it out over 3 months to give it a little bit of space for you to potentially get through it because it is a lot to do. But the good thing, and this is true of most long poetry, right? Once you get going on it, you kind of lock in, and then it goes a lot faster. So the speed with which you begin Inferno is not the speed with which you will complete Paradiso.
And if I remember correctly, the numbering works out where you could pretty much do that over 3 months with about a canto a day.
That's right. Yeah, because you got 33 in we have 34 in Inferno, and then 33 in Paradiso and Purgatorio. So you'll have to do a couple of double ups, but pretty close to one a day.
Yeah. It's that'll be a lot of fun. And I think if I remember correctly, when we had talked about this, I mean, of course we want to talk about the work and we want to do it justice, but I think one of the kind of goals was to maybe drill down on a particular canto or set of cantos that might be sort of emblematic of the rest of the work, so that we don't feel too spread out in the episode, since we only usually talk for about an hour and a half. We could talk about that probably all day. And unfortunately, I don't think many people would stick around for a whole episode like that. So we will try to focus in on something from the whole comedy, and we'll probably try to let people know what those cantos will be that we'll really be focusing on ahead of time, so that they know and are prepared.
That's right.
Once that's over, we're going to lighten the mood a little bit, and we're going to go with in May of 26. We're going to go with The Importance of Being Earnest by Oscar Wilde. Such a great play, so funny. And we have a local organization here called the Eliot Society, which actually, Junius, you've spoken at before, and we just recently last year did a play reading of that one night. We got together in someone's living room, and everybody was assigned characters, and we just read the play together, and it was so fun. And I think listeners will really appreciate just how comical that is. I had to read the part of Canon Chasuble, the Anglican priest, and I felt rather typecast, but it was still a fun night.
Yeah, man, that's great. Yeah, I saw that play on stage when I was in college, the first time I encountered it, and I thoroughly enjoyed myself. It was a wonderful night at the theater. And that brings us in June, and this is intentional and delightful. In June, we're doing Midsummer Night's Dream as our Shakespeare play for the season. We typically do a Shakespeare play each season, and what I liked about this is, it's time for a comedy. Well, we have done Taming of the Shrew as well, but it's just one of the great ones, and I think there's a lot of really cool stuff happening in that play, so I'm excited to talk about it. But also, June is the month in which Midsummer happens, which is also the eve of the Feast of St. John the Baptist. And so we'll be able to line that up a bit. And of course, as many of you may know, I am angling to become the world's foremost fairy philosopher. And so anything having to do with fairies falls directly on my purview. So very excited to get into that one in June.
Stiff competition in that field, but
that's right. Yeah, it's just so many people that I'm competing with for that title.
There are some important ones, but we can hatch it out later. July to September, we're going to do a second trilogy, maybe the other best known trilogy in the history of literature, and that is The Lord of the Rings. So we'll do The Fellowship of the Ring in July, The Two Towers in August, and The Return of the King in September. I'm very much looking forward to that. Those are very formative texts for me. And I think it'll be a lot of fun to get to read those together. And again, we might kind of drill down in each episode on particular parts of the book, rather than try to do a whole survey of all of Fellowship and all of Two Towers and all of Return of the King. But I can't wait to have those discussions. That's going to be so much fun.
I'm so eager for that I've actually started my read now.
So have you really?
That's right. I'm charging through, and just so far I've gotten into almost to the prologue. And all the various background and bits of information. He tells us about hobbits and the Shire and these sorts of things, and a lot of stuff that I didn't remember very clearly. And I'm just excited to rediscover all of that story.
Yeah, so that's going to be a full season, and I think it's going to be a really, really fun one.
I'm so excited. It's going to be great, and so I hope that you guys look forward to that. There may be probably be some more bonus things sprinkled in here and there throughout that as well. Yeah, lots of great journeys ahead.
Excellent.
So now this is shaping up to my favorite season, actually. As I'm looking at it again, I'm thinking, there's not a single book on there that isn't very exciting to me.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be up there. I'm trying to think if there would be anything else that would have really been quite as competitive as a season. I mean, we've certainly done many wonderful individual works, but
Mhm.
as a season, this is really strong. And I like the kind of rhythm of it too. I think the very heavy trilogies, but in between them having some comedies and some way to break things up a little bit. I think it'll just flow really well. So
Yeah.
we'll see how this goes. We'll probably do this structured format of selecting the episodes this way at least probably one more year. And then we'll kind of see, if we like the way that this works out and the way that the seasons cohere, doing it this way, maybe this will be the new way that we do it. But no promises either way.
It's great.
Well, excellent. Well, should we, I guess, transition into talking a little bit about a life of reading and
Yeah.
how that has formed us and shaped us and all that?
Yeah. I can maybe kick it off. I have
Okay.
two things come to mind, and they're kind of related. When I was an English major, I came across this idea of literature as equipment for living. And it really that the idea really stuck with me. And it's not to reduce literature to something pragmatic, to say that well the point of literature is what you can do with it in your life. But it's also to resist the urge to run the other direction into a starkly romantic art for art's sake and say that it has to be just the beauty of the thing and nothing else can matter. Like no, that's equally imbalanced. It is beautiful and valuable in itself, and you would read it if it had no purpose, but it also does have a purpose and a point. It interacts with life in meaningful ways. And for me, I grew up in a very poor family, and I grew up in very challenging social situations, inner city, that sort of a thing. And uh, lots of things about my life were very difficult to put to manage on a day-to-day basis. And as a child, I didn't really have the emotional and psychological resources to respond to the various types of traumas and even just concepts that I was being forced to deal with um, in that situation. And so for me, reading was always a kind of escape. It was a place where I could go to discover worlds or parts of our world that weren't like what I experienced every day. And so it was a proof that the world didn't have to be the way that I experienced it to be in my everyday life. And that was urgent to me because I was really struggling to figure out how it could be worth trying to live in this world, in the circumstances that I was in. And so reading was a great gateway of escape for that. And one particular instance of that came after um, I had I was in college after my first year of college, and so I had um, gone a long way to escaping that place that I started from. And this was at the end of, I guess it was my second year of college. This was the end of my third semester, coming up into Christmas break. And the following semester, I was going to be taking a medieval literature course. And I had been speaking with the professor, and he had given me the syllabus with all the readings for the semester. And I noticed that most of the works we were only reading excerpts from because most of them were very long works. And and it was just kind of an introduction to medieval literature. And so I decided that I would spend my Christmas break reading the full versions of all of the texts that we were going to be reading excerpts from in the coming semester so that I would have that greater well to draw from. And also other works that were mentioned by our textbook. We had a textbook by D.W. Robertson on the literature of medieval England, and he referenced a lot of other things that we weren't going to be able to read. And so I wanted to read all those things too. So I had this huge stack of books I checked out from the library to take home with me for winter break. And when I got them all back to my room, I sat down to my email, and I had an email from this woman that I was madly in love with. And she had been a senior when I was a freshman. She graduated, and she had been potentially slash so entering into this relationship with this other guy, and I had really been hoping that that wouldn't happen and that it would be me instead. And I kind of I think I had this email that said that he had proposed to her, and they hadn't been dating very long or necessarily clearly at all, but they'd known each other for a long time, and she said yes. And it was this is definitively. nothing is going to be able to happen in this relationship. And I was just devastated, as only a teenager can be. And so I was looking around my room kind of at a loss and just my heart breaking. And my eyes fell upon the top book on the stack of books from the library. And it was The Consolation of Philosophy.
What a book.
And I thought, there's zero chance that philosophy can console me right now. But whatever, let's see what you got, Boethius. So I picked it up and I started reading The Consolation of Philosophy on my bed in my dorm room in despair. And I won't say that it cured all of my problems, but it really did help. And it really did help me to lift my eyes a bit and recognize that there's life after heartbreak. And it was very powerful. And I think that was one of the first times that a book had directly spoken to a strong emotional need in my heart, right? They lifted me out of general malaise and discontent and whatnot numerous times before. But here there was a specific, as Boethius is describing how he feels at the beginning of the book, I'm like, yeah, man, like I'm right there with you. That's where I am. And the book was written to address exactly that. And so if I hadn't already been a lifelong reader, I would have been converted in that moment. But that's for me one of the most powerful experiences of literature coming to the rescue in my life.
Wow. Wow. I love that. One thing you said that got me thinking a little bit is when you describe literature as equipment for living, and it's kind of helps us resist the pull towards a romanticism of art for art's sake. You have this kind of debate in literary criticism, right? I mean, you got Poe's essay kind of on the purpose of literature, where he eschews any sort of didactic purpose of literature. It's all about the sort of feeling or the encounter one has with the art. And there's a sense in which I completely agree with you that yes, literature is equipment for living, and yes, we should resist the urge towards romanticism. But I've always found that to be somewhat of a false dichotomy that doesn't really do literature a full service. To say it either has to be didactic or it has to be this kind of romanticism. And I think what I've appreciated about literature, having been a student, having been someone who just loves to read, having been a teacher, having been a pastor, is that literature is really more about the encounter and the conversation that emerges from that encounter that a reader has with the text or with or the community that's discussing the work has with each other. And so for that reason, I think there's a lot that reading can offer us that really is about making us human, fully human. And that's something I've always appreciated about it as an exercise. You know, I mean, reading can take us places that we would never be able to go. It can introduce us to people we would never be able to meet. And these can become lifelong friends and lifelong places that we go back constantly to and revisit often. Reading has changed my life in many ways by exposing me to new ideas and new thoughts. Reading is in many ways how I stayed in the church, you know, because you look at the state of many churches and you think, man, is this all there is? And you know, if this is it, I don't really know if I'm a big fan. But reading, being able to have conversations with some of the great Christian thinkers throughout history, being able to better understand what it is that we do together as the church has helped me in many ways feel much more comfortable in the church. And so, and it's how I became Anglican. I mean, I'll tell one story about this. When I was undergrad, I was on the debate team, and I had been raised Baptist, non-denominational my whole life. It just wasn't. My best friend growing up was Roman Catholic. It is still Roman Catholic, and so I knew a little bit about church tradition. I knew the Hail Mary, and I had a devotion to the Rosary from when I was about 12 or 13, which is a whole other story. But when I got to school, one of the most well-read people I've ever met told me, well, you really need to read more of the Church Fathers, which I had not read. I mean, I read Augustine's Confessions, and that was it pretty much. And so I was at a used bookstore in Raleigh, North Carolina, Reader's Corner right in downtown near NC State, and they had On the Incarnation by Athanasius with a foreword by C.S. Lewis. And I did not know who Athanasius was at the time, but I did know who C.S. Lewis was. And I was like, well, I like C.S. Lewis, so I'll pick up the book and read the foreword. And maybe if the actual contents are any good, I'll keep reading it. Well, of course, On the Incarnation is a classic. It's an incredibly formative book for really the whole Christian tradition. And so when I read it, I thought, wow, this is so beautiful. And it's very different from everything I've ever been taught before. And so that is kind of what started the journey in me to become Anglican and to eventually go into the priesthood. And so it's I'm thankful for it on that end. And the other kind of thing that I greatly appreciate about the encounter aspect of reading is that I think it makes us much more effective pastors because we have the opportunity to read and we can read stories, fiction. I mean, I think the Frankenstein book we're about to discuss is going to have a lot of pastoral sort of application in it. But then there's also nonfiction. Reading the stories of other people and the things they've been through can not only prevent one from making our own mistakes, but it can also help us when we're counseling other people and we're sitting down across the room from someone who has a very different life experience than we do. And to be able to bridge that gap, well, we have practice with these texts, and many things in these texts that speak to us would also speak to someone in their situation. And so being able to have those authors kind of come in alongside of you doing that pastoral counseling work is a huge help, whether the person you're counseling or not knows it. I mean, sometimes you may prescribe a book, and other times you may just need to give them the contents of the book without making them go read it, because they won't read it anyways. But I do think that that's been the most life-giving part of this podcast for me, has been the diversity of texts that we read, the different voices that we include and encounter. And so that's been a ton of fun. And that's why I think reading is always a worthwhile habit to be in.
Yeah, the compassion, it makes me so much more compassionate to have read the types of things that I've read. It's funny that forward to On the Incarnation that Lewis wrote is, of course, the argument that he makes on reading old books.
That's right.
Is near and dear to folks who are drawn to weird things like the classical mind. And I took that very seriously when I read it. I thought that was such a wonderfully lucid and persuasive argument, which is a common experience I had when reading Lewis. And so I really focused on reading older things, and I didn't know what the older things were at first. And it was Lewis himself who was the guide. I began looking for the books that he always talked about and reading those things, and that was how I got into my classics education. But there was also another way in which Lewis was really central to me, and that was when I first read The Republic. I was a new Christian, and I had read the Bible verse that says that the way that seems right to a man, but the end thereof is destruction, and the wisdom of man is foolishness before God, and vice versa, and all these sorts of things. And I thought, gosh, I've spent my whole life with the voices of the world in my ear. How can I think that I'm going to have any sort of discernment about what's good or bad, given that that's the case? And so I thought, well, I really need to shut that voice out for a bit and just listen to the voice of God. Okay, that's a little too giving myself too much credit. I didn't think for a bit. I thought I meant forever, but luckily it got better. Anyway, so I was only I stopped watching all movies, all television. I would only listen to Christian music. Just trying not to put anything into my head that wasn't reinforcing those Christian worldview. I was going to a mega church at the time, Southeast Christian Church in Louisville, Kentucky. Anybody out there? Shout out. They hit me up. And they had a wonderful library, and it was great because not only were there lots of books there that I could just check out for free, but I felt like they had all been vetted. That if they were in this church library, then somebody with more experience than me could vouch for them. And I was going along one day. This was senior year, getting ready to go on a college visit, actually. And I was looking for a book to read to take with me on a college trip, and I happened to see Plato's Republic. Now, I knew exactly one thing about Plato, I think, at that point in time, which is that Professor Kurt thinks that all the important information about traveling to other worlds and that sort of a thing is in Plato. And that if they would just teach that in the schools, then kids would be better prepared for adventures like the Chronicles of Narnia. So I thought, I don't know why he's here, because he wasn't a Christian, I don't think, but he's in the church library, which means he's safe. And Lewis, through Professor Kirk, argues that it's all in Plato. And there was that Plato is one of the folks mentioned in that I'm reading old books essay, right? It's easier to read Plato than read books about Plato. And so I thought, you know what? I'm going to read Plato and I'm going to find out what it all is that's in there. And so I picked it up and I was very, I'll go so far as to say disappointed at first because I was expecting philosophy of other worlds and interworldly travel and the fantastical and all these types of things, and not this lengthy disposition of the nature of justice. It was very difficult. It was a huge slog for me. I really pushed and pushed and pushed, but I wouldn't give it up because it had the highest recommendation for C.S. Lewis and my church, and so I got to the end of it, and um, I don't know how much of it I really got that first time around. There's definitely a lot that I didn't understand about it. I made the common mistake that I still hear a lot of people making, which is they think that it's actually talking about politics, which he isn't. Um, but it's kind of like the first Guinness that I had, which took me the better part of an hour to drink, and I really had to work really hard to get it down. But after that, all other beers tasted good. You know, this my palate was reset by that arduous experience, and so things that would have been hard for me to read before were not hard for me on the other side of having slogged through the Republic.
The tension that you felt there, I think, about what should I read? I'm only going to read these approved texts, speaks to another really important dynamic that I think reading can help us with, which is the sort of fundamentalism versus what we might call a kind of deconstructionism tendency. And I think different people are wired different ways. And based on how you're wired, each of those tendencies can be refined and transfigured into something really good. The fundamentalist wants to stick to what we've been given, and that's a good thing. In a Christian circle, going back to the scriptures, going back to the fathers and the tradition of the church, and all that that's a good thing for us to do. And the person who wants to kind of deconstruct, who wants to ask really tough questions, who questions a lot of things, that certainly is important too, but taken to their logical or their extremes, of course, both tendencies can be problematic. The fundamentalist is one who really lacks a kind of intellectual curiosity and the ability to have, I think, really good conversations with people who might not come from the same place that they do.
Yeah.
Whereas the person who has been on a kind of constant deconstruction can never really arrive at any sort of truth, and they're always going to be deconstructing, and they're always asking questions but never arriving at any answers. And so it's not a healthy way to be. But I think disciplined reading really good texts like what we do on the podcast, and I think just in our lives in general, can help us by reminding us we have to ask those hard questions. The unexamined life is not worth living. And also, it's a good reminder that truth is everywhere, that you can find things that are true in Plato and in Rumi and in Descartes and Nietzsche. Well, I don't know about Nietzsche. But, all of these thinkers have something to offer, even if we don't endorse their whole project, even if there are things we would change about it. We can find truth everywhere and anywhere because all truth is God's truth. So we're not threatened by it. And that's kind of the big takeaway. We don't have to be scared engaging in those conversations. We should be excited, I think, to do that work. It's exciting to read someone who may not have the same worldview or come from the same place that I do, but to realize that actually we do have this in common, this thing in common, or this belief in common, or whatever. And so that can be a really, I think, valuable learning experience to be reading that wide variety of text.
I think that's right, and I also really value that we read a variety of things here, and that's one of the reasons why it's always a negotiation between us about what we're going to read, whether that's in the form of the draft or in the form of sitting down in your living room and hashing it out. It's because we push each other into different areas that we wouldn't go into this season. And I noticed you've taken note of this. I've read more new books for the podcast than ever before, and um, Frankenstein, little preview here, blew me away. Loved Frankenstein. So freaking good. And I've
Great
never
book.
read it in part because I never I thought I knew the story, which didn't. And B, it just didn't seem like the type of thing that I would be interested in. I don't go in for horror and that sort of thing, even though I do love me some Poe. I didn't say some gothic novels, right? I mean, the Walpole, but I just didn't expect it to be something that I would like, and I really really liked it. And as a result of that, I'm very excited. Also to be that we're what do we have coming up? It's something I think it's a little further down the road. There's some other stuff that you might see show up on some future seasons that I'm excited to get into now that Frankenstein is kind of pushed open that door for me. And one of the things that was exciting about it was places where Mary Shelley is not. She and I are not like the most sympathetic of people, intellectually speaking, and yet there were some places where she said some things, and I was like, right on, girl, like absolutely, like, I love that. I love the way you said that. I see myself, quoting it in the future. And so there's those surprising discoveries of finding friends you didn't expect. Books are friends, right?
Yep.
And finding friends you didn't expect in places you didn't expect. Finding that you have finding your mind mirrored in the most unusual of places is really, really great. Um, I think that here's the other central tension of being a reader for me. And I just kind of want to be really transparent here because I think a lot of people can understand these things that we're talking about, and it's that we often speak from a place of being experts and having a platform and this sort of a thing, and I want to make sure that from that position people hear us say things that shows that like we're just like you. I mean, we're just people who just read just like you, and we have the same problems you do. One of the central challenges I have as a reader, and I face it every time I finish a book, is um, do I read something I haven't read before, or do I reread something I love? Because any book worth reading is worth reading twice. You don't really know what's going on. I mean, you have to read a book knowing the end to take full advantage of everything that's happening along the way. And the only way you can do that properly is if you've read it before. If someone tells it to you or you get a spark note or something, that's not it. Because it's not knowing the end of the plot. It's having seen the whole form of the thing and how it was done and how the rhetoric was deployed and all of that sort of thing. Only once you've seen all of that are you able to recognize, oh my gosh, this thing at the beginning is thematically tied to this thing that's going to happen at the end, or wow, look at this foreshadowing, or whatever the thing happens to be. And so there's a particular delight in returning to any book that's worth its salt for a second reading. There's a deeper delight too, and those books that just become favorites that we just want to read over and over again because we like living in the space in the world they create, which is an intellectual space that we inhabit. And so I've got a bunch of books I can't wait to reread. I just mentioned earlier Moby Dick, right? I mean, very high on my list. I want to reread Moby Dick. But I also have a stack of books that I can't wait to read. I have many stacks of books that I can't wait to read. Maybe half the books on these shelves are books that I long to read. And I don't know. So then I've got a limited time. The clock's ticking, right?
Yep.
Maybe I've got 1,000 books in me before I expire or something like that. I don't like to think about the specific number because it'll be depressingly small. So am I going to spend this next book on my list, which I can't get back? Am I going to spend that on something new, or am I going to spend that rereading something else? And there's no easy answer to it. It sucks every time I have to ask that question because there's a genuine desire to revisit my old friends and my old haunts, and there's a genuine desire to experience new things. And that's the tension of being a reader. Is everything you choose to read is something else you're choosing not to read.
This doesn't necessarily alleviate the tension, but I think it's another dimension of the dynamic that you're talking about, which is that when we talk about literature as a conversation, one of the things that makes me excited when I read is to be able to make connections between different friends that I've made over the years, in terms of, oh, that story reminds me of this story, and here's how the conversation between those two can really create some new insight or helps me see something in a different way. This started for me as a biblical studies student.
Mm.
The idea of intertextuality. My thesis, my MDiv, was about the Hagar and Ishmael story. I had been taught my whole life, just by pastors and teachers and everyone, that Hagar and Ishmael are the bad guys in Genesis 16 and 22. Because, well, from the fundamentalist evangelical perspective, that's where Muslims come from. And so they must be bad. You read that story in light of the other stories that the author of Genesis has told, and that the author of Genesis will tell, and that the compilers of the Pentateuch weave together over a broader scale. And you see that not only are Abraham and Sarah recapitulating the sin of Adam and Eve, Sarah takes Hagar and gives her to her husband. She wants to be built up through Hagar, just like Pharaoh was built up through the Israelites at the beginning of Exodus. But also Hagar and Ishmael are given the same promise that God gave Abraham in Genesis 12. They are they tell the story of Israel in reverse. She's an Egyptian woman who's the servant to a Hebrew woman whose name means princess. She gets expelled into the wilderness, where she wanders until she's saved by God through water. All these beautiful connections that really change everything about how I saw that story. And so I wrote about that. I called it a prismatic reading of the story, because I was kind of looking forward and backwards at the same time. And but I think the more that we read texts, stories, or just really anything in the Great Conversation, the more we see new ways of considering things and new conversations emerge from those connections that we make. And so it's always exciting for me when we're in the middle of an episode and we're like, oh yeah, that's kind of like what happened in this story, or that connects to this story. We saw it with Virgil and the Aeneid, right? In recent episode, he's taking the Iliad and the Odyssey and he's matching them together, and he's kind of doing his own thing with them for his own purposes. And so there's a ton of kind of back and forth that you have to do in order to fully appreciate the text. And some of them are more subtle than that. I had this epiphany the other night. I don't know if you've seen the show Alien Earth yet. I like the Alien movies.
I did the Alien franchise. I haven't seen it yet.
So Peter Pan is a huge part of the Alien Earth show. And so watching that, I was like, I just read Peter Pan. This is so cool. Like, I mean, the illusions aren't even subtle, but it was really cool to like pick up on those resonances and stuff. And so I think that conversation, that intertextuality, makes reading always kind of evergreen. It's always fresh. There's always something new to find. Even when you're revisiting an old friend, you're going to find new things in that text, because you're not the same you that read that text the last time. You're a new you. You've been informed by all these other texts now, and you bring all those other texts with you to the table when you go and reread that. And when you read something new, you're bringing all your old friends with you to the party with the new guy. And so it's a great way of really being enmeshed in a something much bigger than ourselves. And those points of connection are always just so exciting. It's like a little light bulb, a little hit of something. It's like, oh, that's so cool, a jolt.
Exactly right. Yeah, I noticed things in the Aeneid this time. I noticed connections in the Aeneid this time that I didn't notice last time, because of the things I've spent time in since then. It had been a long time since I've read the whole thing, and I've read lots of medieval stuff in the meantime. And so a lot more, recognizing more. Wow, Virgil was really present throughout the Middle Ages, and this is not just in Dante, but in all these other ways and other places. And just having finished teaching this course on forgotten epics, we're reading all the other great epics that were in the air when Virgil was writing, or that were just drawing upon Virgil after the fact, and seeing so much more of the connections there than I've seen before. It's wonderful, wonderful. And in that sense, there's I almost never have a bad reading. Every once in a while, I do find myself in a book that it just is sterile. It's not connecting to anything else. It's not feeding into anything else or drawing from anything else. And it's just sitting there like a hot, stagnant summer day.
I think the phenomenon you're trying to articulate is Nietzsche.
And so, readers, this is going to be going on for a long time, this Nietzsche joke. Yeah, and I've reached a point. At one point in my life, I would doggedly press on. Right, I finish every book. That's what I do. And I reached a point when I finally accepted, there's too many good books for me to spend time on bad books. And so unless there's some external reason that I need to be reading this thing that I have to push through, in which case I'm going to accelerate my reading, maybe read less closely because it's not doesn't require a close reading, right? Uh, I'll just give up. I'll just set aside and move on. This is the reason why, and this is super controversial. And so I ask readers to forgive me, and I also ask you to hear what I'm saying about this series. This is the reason why I abandoned my recent reading of Harry Potter. I had read Harry Potter before, and I'm a big fan. Am a big fan. Seen the movies a number of times because it's fun to be in the wizarding world, and that's a less lower time commitment way to be in that world. But I hadn't read the series since they first came out, and so I decided that I was going to read the series, and I got all the way through. I think I was probably halfway through book 5, and I finally just decided that I didn't want to be reading it anymore because it's there's not what's great about the Harry Potter series is the world building. She does a phenomenal job building a world, and it is so fun to be in that world and exploring that thing. But even in the book form, the world building is largely presented to you as what's exciting about it is the novelty of it. When you see, oh, this is the new thing we're introducing this book, a new wizarding dynamic that you didn't know about before. And she seems to think, as she's writing, that what's exciting about it is that it's new. Um, it's very it's very plot driven, and the plot really depends upon there being the one big secret piece of information that you don't know this book that once it comes out will kind of put everything else back into perspective. When you read it knowing that secret, it's not illuminative in the way that it is when you're reading, say, a poetic novel or a Father Brown mystery. It kind of takes the wind out of the sails. There's all this stuff that's happening, and like, well, that's just a mystery, and so I found that for me this time it was not a generative experience. It was
Mm.
rather sterile, and I wasn't enjoying it in the same way. And I thought, I'd rather be reading something different. So I stopped and I picked up a different book that I hadn't read before, a different fantasy book. And from the first page, it grabbed me with an intensity and a depth that was what I was looking for. Do I regret having read Harry Potter? No. Do I think that Harry Potter is a bad series of books? No. Do I still love Harry Potter? Yes, as a world. But I think that as books, they're just okay.
Mhm.
And so, am I going to read Harry Potter to my kids, or let my have my kids read Harry Potter? Absolutely. Am I ever going to teach a class on Harry Potter? Absolutely not. I just don't know what I would say. There's really not much there for me to work with.
And I think part of being a mature reader is being able to admit exactly what you just said, that you don't have to finish every book. You don't have to enjoy every book. It's okay to say, I'm just going to table this. I'm not going to finish it. It's okay. It's okay. You don't have to. There's nobody has a gun to your head saying you must read these books. I don't like shaming people, oh, you haven't read that? Oh, shame on you, I mean, if I love a book, I'll of course tell someone, I hope you read this. It's so good. But it's people should feel like it's okay to do exactly what you did and say, I'm just
And I
going to
hope
stop this one.
I hope that one of the things we've modeled this past season is that also to that some books are not the cup of tea of very educated people, right? I don't know if you guys picked up on this, but Father Wesley did not like the Nietzsche that we read.
I
Um,
don't.
it's just not he's not on board with it. And it's fine. And I really while I liked it better than I expected to, the Baldwin that we read, I was just like, well, this is not. I don't like to read these kind of books very much.
Interesting.
And the same thing for the Walker Percy. I was just like, eh.
Really? Well, I do. Yeah, I remember that about Walker Percy. I did not realize that about the Baldwin book.
Yeah, and some of that is just personal, psychological stuff. It's
Sure, sure.
reading about Black people living in very constrained circumstances is very difficult for me,
Sure.
because it hits too close to home. But also this modernism is generally speaking not my bag. It's not very interesting to me. I did not enjoy Wuthering Heights in the slightest.
Hmm.
I probably should read it again to see, because I was fairly young when I read it, and so maybe I'd like it now. But I really, really didn't like it, and so I don't want to review it again. I probably won't, unless you make me by putting it on future season. Um, and the point is not that. I think the idea that, okay, Junius has really got to read Wuthering Heights and figure out what's wrong with him so he can like it. That's not the point at all. Just because I don't like it doesn't mean it's not great. Everything that's great doesn't appeal to me.
Yep.
And everything that I like isn't great. And so just because I like it doesn't mean there's something wrong with you if you don't like it. Right? In fact, it may very well be that there's something wrong with me. That's the reason I like it.
That is also just part of particularity, though, that we can't like everything great because we're not some sort of infinite objective viewer of all things. We are particular people who are informed by particular experiences and backgrounds and all these kind of things. And so yeah, I'm not going to like every single novel that we read or every Nietzsche book or whatever. But that's okay. I don't have to. That said, well, Nietzsche may be the one thing I would say maybe we should reevaluate whether he belongs in the canon. But most things I think we can say, well, yeah, Sense and Sensibility, right? Or I'm sorry, Emma. When we read Emma, I wasn't my first read through. I wasn't crazy about it. It grew on me, but it just wasn't my cup of tea. No pun intended.
That's okay.
And
Yeah, you think that your wife is better than my wife, and I think that my wife is better than your wife, and that's the way it should be.
right,
And
right.
neither one of us is right because there's in an objective sense because there is no objective better, but both of us are right in the sense that those women are better for us than the other one would be. I think that's very very true. We aren't meant to contain all things,
Right.
and if we get okay with that, we'll realize that there's plenty of stuff that we can contain that we needn't feel it as a loss.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Yeah. I do like being challenged to try
Yes.
things that I don't like, that I don't think that I will like, or that I have historically like. And I do think it's important to challenge yourself with things you've decided in the past you don't like, different sorts of things, because you might discover that you have changed and that you found connections to things you wouldn't have had connections to before.
You ever read the book Blue Like Jazz by Don Miller?
On my shelf somewhere, but I haven't read it.
It was a very popular and sort of the emergent church early 2000s world. And but there's a great story. The title of the book comes from the fact that he never appreciated jazz until he saw someone who really loved jazz listen to it.
Yeah.
And then, I mean, I don't know that jazz became his favorite genre or anything, but he got it. So it's kind of the same thing. I'm not like classical music's not necessarily the thing I listen to the most, but when I go to a symphony or when I listen to it with people who know what they're talking about and who love it, like, yeah, I totally I see it. And so while that may not change my daily playlist on my commute, it still broadens my horizon to have that encounter, that engagement with them over that topic. And so yeah, I think it's important that we challenge ourselves. Absolutely, we need to get out of our comfort zone.
Yes, part of why we have particularity in the first place is so that we have something to teach one another.
Yes.
It's fun to teach other people things, trust them, and it's also fun to learn things from other people. As long as we can set our pride aside and just let someone teach, like it's great. It's one of the reasons why I've known so many professors who have apprenticed to a woodworking trade or some sort of craft or something that's very nothing to do with academia at all, because they can set their ego aside. There's none of that. Oh, I can't believe you don't know this, or I can't believe you haven't read this. It's understood that they wouldn't know anything about it, and they love that joy of being taught by another person. I think that's a very human thing that we enjoy both teaching others and being taught by others. And me not loving something like dance to begin with provided the opportunity for someone to teach me about dance, and now I do love it. And when that happens, something of that person comes with me every time I do that now. I remember the person who recommended that I read The Man Who Was Thursday. She's part of that book for me now because it was with her that I came to encounter it, and I think that's also one of the reasons why it's great to recommend books to one another, um, because we're sharing more than just the book. When I tell you this book was so good, you got to read it. What I really mean is I really love this book, and if you're like me, you'll probably like it too. You may not be like me at all. People tell me I'm going to love books all the time that I don't
Yep.
because they don't know me well enough to make that statement. But even though they may be wrong, I learned something about them, and I see things about them, and I like to ask them, okay, so what did you love so much? And what about it do you think what made you think of me when you read this book? That's what I would like to do.
I like that a lot. Well, a priest that I'm pretty close with, one of my sort of mentors, I noticed this recently because I had a big synod where all the priests meet for business stuff, and he had a book with him. I was like, "Oh, what book are you reading?" So he shows it to me, and he flips open the cover, and he had written in it um, the date and the occasion on which he read it. So he said, I read August, 2025 on the way to Synod.
Hmm.
I thought that was a really cool way of cataloging one's read to have that in the front of the book. Like every time I pick this up, I'm going to explain where I was and kind of what was going on as I read it. Um, as a good reminder of that particularity, as a good reminder of revisiting those conversations. Where was I the last time? Where am I now? I just thought that was a really cool exercise that he did. It wasn't a very long, it was just a couple lines of writing. It was really, really cool, a good idea, I thought.
That's very cool. I did when I was in college. I was reading C.S. Lewis's diary, recently published, and this was from years when he was a graduate student and before he was a Christian. And it's largely a chronicle of because what his life consisted of at the time was, going to lectures at the university and meeting with fellows and writing papers and reading things and this sort of a thing. So it was largely a kind of academic um, memoir, or memoir is the wrong word either, record, right? It's just kind of what's he spending his time thinking about and what's he reading. And I was I mean, at one level, it's pretty boring, unless you happen to be really interested in the person and in the manner of living that he described. I found it just absolutely archetypal. And so I kept off and on because I was very bad about being consistent with it. But for months at a time, I kept a diary that probably goes on to 150 or 200 type pages when I was in college. That was just that sort of a thing. So talking primarily about the books that I was reading, the thoughts that I was having, the people I was having conversations with, and that kind of a thing. And it's fun for me to go back to it from time to time and re-encounter those first experiences. And oftentimes I'll read something and I'll be like, oh wow, like I had forgotten that I had read that book back then, and like wow, look at that, I was liking it, I was enjoying it. I didn't like it then, but I like it now, or whatever it is. Mm. Yeah, and then that's to maybe think about how to put a cap on this because we can do this forever, and I love it. This is kind of what this is about, right? It's about the fact that reading the life of reading, being a reader, is a journey, and it's not a journey to anywhere in particular. It's a journey through some place, and that is through life. It's a journey of being human, and you hope that you're becoming the goal. Perhaps is to become more human as you go along, because there's a lot of stuff in the world, especially in the modern world, that aims to dehumanize us, to reduce us to just things that click where we're told to click, and all that sort of thing. And it connects us to other humans, and it connects us to our own humanity. And this is kind of, midway the course of this life reflections on what it has meant to us to have been on this path, and why we intend to stay on this path, and why we intend to keep doing everything we can to shepherd and guide others onto the path and to keep them moving forward.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, it's a fun journey. It's a worthwhile journey. I'm glad to be on the journey with you, Junius, and with you all listeners. The show's gone through several iterations now at this point. But I think each one, it keeps getting better and more worthwhile. And so I'm looking forward to going further up and further in with you.
Absolutely. Thank you guys for coming on this journey with us. We're so excited to have crossed the 2,000 mark, and we're going to press on and keep leading whoever wants to follow. We're going to go.
Sounds like a plan. Sign me up.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. It's too late for me. That's right. That's right. Well, good. Well, excellent. Well, we will be back here soon with our next episode on Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. I think that conversation is going to be really, really interesting. I'm looking forward to it. So until then, keep reading.